Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special event presented by the North Carolina Chamber Music Institute. Today, we are presenting a wonderful program, and it's called Life in the New Zealand String Quartet Conversation with Doug Beilman. Tonight, we are talking with someone who has an intimate connection to the chamber music world and a vast knowledge of the string quartet repertoire. And he's someone that I happen to know very well because he is my brother, Douglas Beilman. It is one of the silver linings of these challenging times that we can have a chance to connect with each other in different ways and explore all kinds of connections and memories with each other. I'm really excited to share this opportunity with all of you today. So, just by way of introduction, Doug joined the New Zealand String Quartet in 1989 with this internationally recognized ensemble. He made many tours around the world, playing many of the great halls in Europe, including Wigmore Hall in London and the Frick Collection in the United States. Other tours took the quartet to Canada, Mexico, Korea, Scotland, and we were fortunate to have them come to Raleigh on a number of occasions. They were hosted here by the Chamber Music Raleigh, which used to be known as the Raleigh Chamber Music Guild. Today, Doug joins us from his home near Wellington, New Zealand. I'll let him tell you the name of the town. After our conversation, we welcome questions from those who are attending our event today. So, Doug, welcome to our special event.
Hello, Liz. It's nice to be a part of it. Thanks.
So, before we talk about your life in the quartet, I thought it would be fun to take a look back at our shared upbringing in Wichita, Kansas. And, it's worth noting that in many cases, those who follow a musical path in life can point to some events or experiences from their childhood, young adulthood that had a profound influence on them and led them to go that route. So, if you could tell everyone a little bit about our background together and tell about the influences on you during those years.
Oh, okay. Well, summarizing one's youth is always a rather experimental process, but in the musical terms, I always wanted to play an instrument. I really wanted to play the flute when I was 8, and I remember crying because our father made me play the violin because he wanted to have a family string quartet. But I was soon quite happy with that. And I think if you talk about kind of inspiring moments that really leads one to want to do something, there were two events really. I remember a concert that I went to with our father around I was 10 or 11, and Jamie Laredo was playing, I think, with Joseph Kalkstein in the main hall in Wichita. And I just remember the sound, the verve of the violin, what it could sound like being so extraordinary. That was really inspiring to me as a young violinist, though I still wasn't taking private lessons in. And then following at the age of 13, when I did start taking private lessons on the violin, what was really seminal for me was hearing the Tokyo String Quartet at a concert at Friends University in Wichita. And I remember they played Bartok 4, I believe, and a Haydn quartet, maybe the Sunrise. But in any case, I just remember again that the sound of these four instruments, their kind of unanimity and homogeneity of timbre, and as well as a kind of sheer dynamic kind of explosion that occurs in a spontaneous way in an ensemble like that. I knew that's what I wanted to do. So then, you were starting the cello. We started playing together more and more. We had these chamber music evenings where we read a lot with, I can't remember who we read with exactly. Sometimes our brother Greg, who kind of played the viola. But we did it quite a lot. And we ended up, of course, at a couple moments. We had a trio, I think, in high school called the Beilman Trio. And then when we both ended up at Wichita State University for a year or so, we were in a string quartet together there as well. And really, from that time in Wichita, well, even before that, I was always in a string quartet and have always been until I left the New Zealand String Quartet 5 years ago. So it's, I think, you're inspired and then you do it to a certain degree. And I was always playing chamber music. That's that kind of wanting to play chamber music, wanting to read chamber music, and wanting to work on it. So of course, I just remembered I had a high school string quartet with our brother Greg. He was in viola, and I remember doing Haydn Emperor Quartet and movement from the Franck Quartet, which now isn't one of my favorites, but I remember at the time I loved that romantic fervor of that piece. So it has been a family experience in many ways, certainly earlier on. And I think that's, the family part of it was really a special gift because it meant we always had something to kind of do together, even though it was, not all the time, but it did make a big difference.
Wonderful. Great. So, we're going to go on and talk a little bit more about how chamber music was such a strong attraction for you, and as it was for me. But your path took you to different schools than mine did. I ended up going to Indiana University, where I studied with Fritz Mogg on the cello, and I was fortunate to work with the amazing musician Rostislav Dubinsky, who had been the first violinist with the Borodin String Quartet.
Mhm.
And he was a young student in Moscow when Shostakovich was writing his works, and in fact, he played a role in the initial stages of those drafts for Shostakovich, which is kind of
Yes,
another
but
story.
he was quite jealous. The young Borodin Quartet, of course, because I read Dubinsky's biography, autobiography. But he was quite jealous, of course, it was the Beethoven Quartet who did most of the premieres, and they had to wait quite a while before I think they did some of the later quartet premieres, but um, they weren't first off the post as far as getting to play those works. But they were certainly, I mean, intimately involved with that whole milieu, and Shostakovich as a you know just a real treasure that everybody wanted to tap into because his music was so expressive of those things. So I can understand, Dubinsky as an influence to actually work with him, which I never did, but I know other people, other musicians who have.
Hmm. Well,
Mm.
he was an amazing, gentle soul, actually, but had very high standards, and he was an amazing teacher. Taught many great musicians who are actually now, following careers in chamber music. So tell us about your path. So how did you end up? Where did you go after you left Wichita?
Well, I first stop was a few years in New York. That I went to the Juilliard Pre-College and then the regular division. I did chamber music there. I didn't find a great group, but in my brief sojourn, the 1 year that I spent at the college division, I studied chamber music with Klaus Adam, and we did piano quintets for most of the year there, and that was very, very interesting, uh, but not as inspiring as what I would later experience when I returned to the East Coast after a hiatus in Wichita, where we were playing quartets together. I don't believe we had any amazing coaches in Wichita, but we had some wonderful people guiding us, like Jeff Irvine, sorry, the violist, who was a great coach and very, very enthusiastic and supportive, and now a great teacher in his own right. And then I went back to New England Conservatory, and that was really amazing. And primarily, I went there for the chamber music coaches because I knew at the time that Louis Krasner and Eugene Lehner were teaching there, and especially Eugene Lehner, who had been a member of the Kolisch Quartet, a pre-World War II string quartet um, that was kind of Viennese in origin, though he was Hungarian, and they played by memory. And he had such a rich understanding of the tradition of Central European tradition of music and chamber music. I mean, he had studied Bartok, had been his teacher for theory in Budapest, and he'd played Ravel's quartet to Ravel. So I mean, the amazing sense of being able to interact with somebody who had that kind of understanding. He didn't actually talk about that. I only found out those things later, but he was totally involved, Eugene Lehner, with the kind of inner life of of the music that we played as chamber musicians. So I studied every year with him there for 3 years, just constantly, almost no other coaches, and Krasner, Louis Krasner, who was also extremely interesting. But Lehner was really a profoundly inspiring coach. His way of listening, he never seemed critical, and yet his listening was so acute and so responsive to what you're doing. And his way of suggesting things was all about um, a kind of honesty and a life of the music, a kind of real sense of the music's vitality. Because there is a way to approach chamber music where it becomes like a sculptural exercise, and things are created to we do it this way all the time, and we're bound by that. And without talking about that process, Lehner did seem to encourage um, a remarkable sense of spontaneity that you build upon the understanding you have of your colleagues in an ensemble, and you it gives you should give you greater freedom, not less. So for me, that was very, very important. And I had later coachings with him over the, returning with, in fact, the New Zealand String Quartet. When I first joined them, in 1989, we were the quartet in the fellowship program in Tanglewood, and so we played for, Eugene Lehner among many other people, including Krasner and Joel Krosnick from the Juilliard, the wonderful violist from the Juilliard, also uh, also the pianist. Who was a director there, and now I can't remember his name. That's terrible. Leon Fleischer, of course. We played Beethoven for Leon Fleischer. He's a pianist, but he loved Beethoven quartets, and so that kind of experience was phenomenal. But yeah, I mean, in a way, there's too many influences to mention, but I think Lehner was kind of the gold standard for everybody else. I mean, and then as a student and an undergraduate and master's, I had coachings with uh, guest coachings with members of the Juilliard. I'd never studied with them, sustained period, but Robert Mann, who was an amazing coach in the sense of that feeling that when you're playing within a profound a piece of music, like as what we played for him was the first movement of 132 in A minor by Beethoven, the feeling of that the sense of pacing as it relates to the music's own impetus and how we translate that in the moment, and also that sense of almost kaleidoscopic of the other voices around you as you play, and the growth of that kind of awareness. Joel Krosnick was a phenomenal coach. And played for him. Other people played for over the years, Earl Carlos, and then in latter years I had a wonderful 3 weeks in the early years of the quartet with the Amadeus Quartet, and the coaching styles were vastly different. And then as a professional, not even just a young one, but as a middle-aged professional, coaching with members of other quartets that are almost contemporaries but a bit older, like Harald Schlichting, the wonderful violist, teaches at Munich Hochschule. But we brought him over, played with him, but we also played the whole Beethoven cycle to him. He was in the Cherubini Quartet, and he was just a phenomenal coach. And the extraordinary thing is that to realize how many different ways it is possible to hear the music and to guide, other musicians to the extent that you feel that the coach's own personality affects not just what they say, but the style in which they say it. And there are so many acceptable ways. I mean, going back to many hours spent with Zoltán Székely in Banff, I don't know if it was into his 100th year, but he was with the Hungarian Quartet, and very methodical and very, very focused on detail. I think there is a dot on this note. Yes, there is a dot. And there is a line over that note. But there was still a method there in which it was translated into a kind of permeable sense of what the composer was after. So, having been able to study with three people who actually worked with Bartók really gives you a different sense of, it gives you a kind of a sense of where that language came from, even as much as it was very personal language from Bartók, nonetheless inspired by folk music, which then became so integrated into that voice. So it's not just a pastiche kind of thing for Bartók. So really, I mean, the whole idea of how you learn as a musician from coaches and what they give you is is really one a simple case of as many as possible is the best. And then sometimes you are gifted, as I was with Laner, to study over an extended period with a coach. So, in fact, I have probably about 100 hours of recordings that I hope are still extant that I someday will go through. I'm a little bit embarrassed to hear myself that I might either that maybe I played a lot better back then than I do now. Who knows? But in any case, it's really I think that if your passion lies in some area like chamber music, which I think is a wonderful genre because of the combination of your own individual voice plus being part of an ensemble, and never mind that the music, say for example for string quartet, how many works are there that are part of this phenomenal canon of music? I mean, there's just probably 200 to 300 now works, and even in the last 30 years, so many new works that are just absolutely new ways of hearing things again. So I can't keep up with all of it. I don't, in fact, but when I hear things that other groups are doing on occasion, new pieces, I find that extraordinarily stimulating, and
Yes.
there's just a range, such a huge range now. So it's a burgeoning field. So, I think it's a wonderful thing and I feel profoundly fortunate that I was able to do it for nearly 30 years as a professional.
Well, it's an amazing career even before you got to playing with the string quartet, and then once with them, you continued to learn and grow, and not just from those teachers that you were working with on an ongoing basis, and but from your colleagues themselves, and I thought it might be fun to just take a moment and play a little clip or two from your time with the New Zealand String Quartet. So bear with me while I make that transfer here, and then afterwards we'll talk a little bit about how you actually work together to come to an interpretation. I'd like to hear a little bit about how a group works together. So let's go to something right now. All right. So this is the New Zealand String Quartet performing the Shostakovich String Quartet number 7 in F sharp minor. This is the Opus 108. wish we could listen to all of that. It's an amazing segment of a very intense piece. And we have a lot of students in our audience today, and I'm sure they would love to hear how you go about putting something that complicated together. Um, you're four different individuals coming from four very different perspectives. And so, talk a little bit about that, about the process of learning and growing to be a unified string quartet.
Oh, you don't pick small topics. we Yeah, each one of these the idea of coaches and as an inspiration, that's a huge thing, and what they give you. Also, of course, the idea of the journey as an ensemble player. We were fortunate enough, as in the quartet. I mean, the quartet is still going on with a different second violinist. It's been 5 years. Doesn't seem that long because we had near nigh on 25 years together, well over 20 years. I can't remember exactly as in the formation you just saw. Um, I think the experience definitely changes over time. So I won't focus as much on maybe what the latter experience was in terms of as a professional. I'll maybe touch on it, but I think that one of the more uh, notable challenges when you're starting out is actually just knowing what to look at first, what to do first. Of course, one of the things I have to say is that it's probably important that as the individuals in the group that you have a preparation before you ever start rehearsing. I mean, if I recall what Lehner told us that about the rehearsing in the Polish, they had to individually memorize their parts before they actually rehearsed. Now you can imagine that's before YouTube. That's even only shortly after vinyl records had come in. They had to be able to play, by memory their own parts, though they did rehearse with the music. But but that level of preparation and memorizing things, that's another whole topic for chamber musicians. But the idea that you know as much about the piece as an individual before you start. Now, then you do that, and here's the funny thing that happens is that because you have learned so much, you have an opinion. And that's why chamber music and rehearsing it can be really fraught. It can be. I mean, you remember the rehearsals. I don't remember them specifically, but I'm sure that there were things when we were in a quartet together. um, because I think also when you're doing it for the first or second or 10th time, it's still a very new endeavor. You have all the things which you might call ensemble hygiene, which you have to work out. Intonation. Well, no, that's a pretty advanced thing, but the basic plot of the music, how it proceeds in terms of tempo, in terms of transitional elements, balancing and tuning, vertical chords tuning, um, timbral colors, how much vibrato, how little, how much bow do you use, where do
Not to mention the bowings themselves.
well, that's right, the bow, absolutely. Which I found less important as you went on, unless it made a big difference in terms of the effect of the stroke, the sound, and articulation you got. Um, but
And we
those are
might
all
just
those
take a minute to explain to people what bowings are. Some people might be listening to this today.
bowing, whether you go up bow or down bow, how many bows, how many notes you might connect to in a slur, for example, or even so anything to do with the bowing, how much accent you give to it at the beginning of the note, anything, because the bow is a string player's voice, really, right? Our fingers
Mm-hmm.
make no sound on their own, though there are contemporary composers who write wonderful effects for the left hand on its own. So we won't go there right at the moment. But what's really most important, I think, to remember as a young musician when you're rehearsing uh, for the first time with new people is probably and I wish somebody had drilled this into me, but is to be open to kind of learning where other people are coming from. What are the things that drive them, the positive things, because
Mm-hmm.
those are the things that you can learn from as a player. What are the things that they do, or that their skills, the strengths that they have, that you find are inspiring? For example, if I just point out to you, although you don't hear in this piece, but Julian, our violist, that was a very angular piece, but she has a real sense of melodic contour and beauty of line. And I worked with her the longest in the quartet for almost the full 27 years that I was in the quartet, and she had that aspect about her that was always a real strength, a real thing that I learned so much from. And it was more natural to her than it was for me. So, when you're younger, it's even more important that you kind of understand where other people are coming from, and you try to balance as you can tell, I'm a talker. So I think the biggest thing for me was to modify how much I actually talked in the group, and kept that balance, because otherwise people feel left out, and there begins that whole drama of human interaction, and the discomfort thereof, because of the sense that you're not able to contribute. So right. So in other words, understanding the personalities of your colleagues, or of your players, even if you're only playing together for a few months, it's really important to kind of have a patient attitude towards that. And I
I
speak
love
from
that. Mm-hmm.
I speak from an experience of not having done enough of that when I was younger, because the goal, and that's what if I go back to where I started, the goal, it, to know the piece as well as you can, especially if you're playing a piece you always wanted to play, and then suddenly you get to do it, and you might have all these amazing ideas about what you want to do, that other people should just, hey, you got to buy into this guy, because I know this piece, I've loved it for 10 years. And then the other guy says, well, I know it, I've known it for 15 years, and I've loved it more than you have, right? So that I'm deliberately making it an absurd argument, but it's like that's what happens. So
Well, it's because
that's
people
not
are
where you
so
want to go,
passionate. People are so
right?
passionate. The thing that brought you halfway across the world, you left the United States. You're a Kansas boy, You left Kansas. You went to Juilliard pre college. You weren't even in college yet when you went to Juilliard in New York. Then you went to, San Francisco Conservatory, and then all the way across the country to New England Conservatory. And then, then you were in a string quartet in San Francisco for a while. You met your friends in the New Zealand String Quartet, and that's how you joined up with them, right? I mean, you met them
Well,
at a
yes.
competition.
Well, if you go back to a bit of history, actually, San Francisco was the last conservatory. That was a new master's that they created in chamber music. So I actually have a master's in chamber music. Great thing about that was, no, I mean, it's what was wonderful was that I actually got to focus on quartet for 2 years, just that, with a little bit of academic work on the side. So that was phenomenal. And yes, and that we in our end of our first year and our second year, we were together 4 years. That was a Sierra String Quartet in San Francisco. We did a lot of competitions, and so I met other musicians. And yeah, my job in the string quartet here in New Zealand came from the fact that a musician I knew in Boston, Wilma Smith, was looking for a new second violinist, and they were in a. I didn't know that when we were both in the Banff competition in Banff, Canada, the string quartet competition. They have the finalists are 10 groups that they invite there, and both our quartets were there. So, and I said, well, if you ever need a second violinist, give me a call. And 2 weeks later, before they left Canada, I was getting a call. So it just shows you that, you need to lay the path for future opportunity. And yes, I left the U.S., which was probably a big step, but I left it to be in a quartet that had a lot of support, a lot of concerts, and with people that I kind of knew already, at least one person. I mean, Wilma left after 4 or 5 years to pursue other goals, but we in the end then had a quartet that with the same personnel for well over 20 years. But it was the opportunity to play string quartet. I mean, by then I knew very well.
Right.
I was almost 30, that I knew very well that's really what I wanted to do. And I knew enough about the situation that the New Zealand String Quartet had here in New Zealand, that I knew that that's was just a golden opportunity to continue playing. So I benefited immeasurably from that.
Right.
And as I said, we continue to coach. I must have had hundreds of hours of coaching over the time I was with the quartet, even up to a few years before I left, at nearly the age of 55, over 50. We were still playing for other people. And I should go back to that. Uh, Robert Mann. I mean, you don't read about this, and that's the great thing about chamber music and playing in an ensemble, that if you're in an ensemble that can continue doing it, you keep doing it all your life. The Juilliard Quartet, towards the end of Robert Mann's time in it, as long when Eugene Lehner was still alive, the Juilliard was still playing for Eugene Lehner
Oh,
their
wow.
very mature years. It's extraordinary. So I think and I'll go back to that again. The idea that that you maybe one has to adjust your attitude to allow more air and more breathing room, as I did just now, slowing down when I'm talking, right? But letting other people speak is so important, and encouraging people who may be less, forthright with their comments and everything. You and I came from a big family, which said, and a very interactive family, very close in age. And you remember that all those conversations around the dinner table. I think that the paradigm of that really fed into chamber music for me. The idea of this
Hmm.
kind of sometimes unruly and sometimes slightly chaotic interaction.
Process is important. Respect is important. Um, you know, Being continually open to growing opportunities, your whole life, though that's all important. And these are all life lessons, by the way, right? I mean, these are things that benefit us in the rest of our life. I mean, that's one of the most wonderful things I think about chamber music and chamber music education is for these kids who are having a chance to do this at a young age. They're learning skills that are going to benefit them in every other walk of life to come.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to take a moment also to mix things up a little bit and share some photos, okay? So here's a photo that I thought we had to share, just so that we can embarrass me
Well,
more than you.
yes. Yeah, you can tell that's in the 70s. Yeah, the hairdos and it's a good thing it's black and white. Is all I can say, Liz, because I'm wearing a velour green suit. I don't know if you recall that, but it
I
was
do,
quite
and
a
I remember Greg's shirt was like a powder puff blue or something.
yes,
Blue.
yes,
We used to call those silk shirts, and it wasn't silk; it was polyester.
of course.
We That was our trio, and those were the years that we were playing together. And we did have another friend who joined us and played string quartets with us. And I remember, and I don't know if you remember this, but when our father, who loved chamber music so much, and he still does, when he wanted us to start playing stringed instruments, he said, "Look, I just want you to play these instruments for a little while, just until you can learn how to play the Mozart eine kleine
Yeah,
Nachtmusik
that's
together."
right. Yeah.
And so it was probably about this age that we were playing the Mozart. And by that time, we got bitten by the bug, and we weren't going to let it go. I mean, that might have been his evil plan, to get us to do that. But that was the time. And now our older brother ended up becoming a doctor. So he still uses his considerable skills with his hands in other ways. He's a surgeon. So that's one. And I wanted to share this photo. This is you with your lovely wife in New Zealand. And I think it's important to make the point that, you did change your life to go over to New Zealand. And you met a lovely woman there. She's a musician as well, and a teacher, and you've created a real life there. And it's wonderful. I think they both play instruments, isn't that right? Don't Evelina and Joseph both play?
Yes, neither one is going to go into music, but Evelina plays piano very well and violin enough to play in the school orchestra, and Joseph is a very talented saxophone player.
So now I thought we would continue just a little bit and show another video, a video clip. And this one comes from a video you all put together about a tour you were doing in London. And I think it illustrates really 2 points. That it begins with you talking about a contemporary composer that you all worked with in New Zealand. And then it goes on and shows a little bit of that touring life and what that's like. So when we come back, I'd like to hear your thoughts about contemporary composers, your dedication as a quartet to New Zealand composers, and then what is it like to tour? So we can break that up a little bit. But let me screen share here, and let's look at this little video clip.
It's quite a unique experience to bring a piece such as Gillian Whitehead's Puhaki Kite Rangi, which of course is intimately concerned with creatures of the sea and specifically whales, whose song, as Richard notes many times, are probably the longest uh, duration of any song of any animal on the planet moving, being heard thousands of kilometers away. This is a very unique piece and very much specifically associated with New Zealand because of two reasons. First of all, the instruments that Richard Nuns plays on this piece are all made of whale bone, sourced from um, sacred, or you might call validated whale from New Zealand. And this creates a timbral sonority that is really quite haunting and quite speaks quite truly to the kind of idea of New Zealand as an island country in the middle of many waters. The composer Gillian Whitehead has actually integrated quite successfully the idea of the Western art music in not confrontation with these sounds, these Maori instruments, but in fact in concert with them.
So I loved seeing you all jumping off and on those buses over there in London, and hearing you play that so colorful music. So if you can tell us a little bit about, I know that over the years you were actually very involved in commissioning works when you were music director with the Adam Music Festival and at other times. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that, and just in general, why is it important to play contemporary music of local composers?
Yes, I think, the more involved you are with the genre of chamber music as from the inside out, like doing it, all the time, that the definitions drop away. Like what we call contemporary music is really only music written by living people, but it's it can harken back, as in the case of what I was speaking about with the Julian Whitehead piece, which we didn't hear any of, but it can harken back to antiquity, or before recorded history, in the case of the Maori arts, which were passed down as an oral history, and of recent decades it's being tapped into again, as difficult as that process is. um, so in a country, a young country like New Zealand, which is even younger than the US, and younger than Australia for that matter, in a sense of settlement and finding its own identity, it's quite a long journey to make culturally, where you would call the musical talent that is born in the country, that grows up here, feels the kind of confidence and assuredness that their voice is unique, and that they don't have to feel defensive about being from the other ends of the earth, which I think New Zealand went through a large stage of that, having been a colony of England, and looking to Mother England, as they say, for so much of its cultural sustenance. So, but that has not existed now for some decades. So New Zealand has a thriving musical scene, and considering there are only 5 million people here, an extraordinary amount of music being written uh, for classical music and many genres. I mean, over the years, I think we premiered, not counting student workshops, I counted at one point, but it was between 50 and 60 works just for quartet, and other works involving piano quintets, or the work with the tangoporo, which are the Maori instruments. We did just so much that it became, I think, um, a journey of memory in some ways. I mean, because when you play a new piece by a composer whose voice you don't know, the personal search, the feeling within even the group, is a struggle to kind of to recognize, what is this sound, what are these sounds that this composer hears, that we we want to bring alive. And that, we played a number of Jillian's works. They're still playing new works by Jillian Whitehead. And we recorded a whole album of her works, in fact. So, but I remember the first time playing a work by her, and I played a solo piece too that's really quite extraordinary and way too hard. It's hard. But the thing is that we have played enough of her music now that we know the context. But the very first time you play a new work by a composer that you don't know so well, and you might have chosen to commission because of other things you heard, you're still faced with that challenge of kind of trying to absorb what it is, their sound world that they existed in. It is true that some composers are rather cerebral, and you may wonder that is this person actually excuse me, just running low on battery, is this person actually hearing these sounds? But fortunately, because of the kind of experience of a lot of these composers, both the more mature ones and younger ones, you don't go through that. That doesn't happen very frequently at all. But it was always one of the most enjoyable things, because for me to be playing new works, because you're doing just what I said. You're trying to hear these new sounds and trying
And
to
it
also to
stretches
get
you, doesn't it? It
yeah,
stretches you.
absolutely stretches you, and you're trying to get that perspective on what is it like outside of the group, like the four of us are doing this. What is that sound together that we're trying to create? Unfortunately, it's still the truth that you don't always have enough time, if you're playing a piece for the first time, to really learn it. I mean, when you consider that when we played the Quartet has just played the Beethoven cycle again. Well, we first did that before the year 2000. We did, maybe in the time I was with them, we did about 12, 13 cycles of all the Beethoven quartets, some of which we'd already played decades before. And so we have that kind of repeated association with the piece, right? We're able to go back to it, right? Like catching up with an old friend, and you kind of resolve certain things, and you realize there are other things you didn't notice before. Well, you don't get that with a new piece. You just don't get that. And so but some of the new pieces you play say, we have to come back to that, or we have to play that somewhere else, because it's just so amazing and so provocative, right? And so then you start that same process with that music, and that's when you start to feel that same sense of depth and complexity. Some groups are really good. You think of a group like the Arditi quartet in Europe. I don't know if they're still going now, but some contemporary groups, and there'll be other younger groups that are doing this, that are just phenomenal at quickly coming to an understanding of a composer's language. I wouldn't say that we were exceptional at that, but we had the honor of being able to be the point of the conduit for many of these young composers, first foray into string quartet, and then some of them would write additional music for us.
Well, and I think the output that the New Zealand String Quartet has in that area is really remarkable, outstanding. But I'd like to pivot now and just talk for a moment about Beethoven. Of course, this is the Beethoven year, the 250th anniversary of his birth. And the quartet has performed many times the works of Beethoven. In fact, complete cycles. I think you said, how many times have you all done the complete?
Well, as complete cycles, before I left, it would be 12, 13 times. I think.
That's just amazing, And so those
And it
pieces
doesn't
are
count
like
all
old friends to you at that point, right?
I mean, we were always playing Beethoven, and I think most quartets that are not specialized, say, in contemporary music or whatever, you may have a specialty. Most quartets play Beethoven. I mean, you might find a quartet that is not comfortable with that language, but I would find that very, very, very surprising, because the gamut of Beethoven's works, from the early, Opus 18 to the final late quartets, is just so astonishingly diverse, and such like a document, like a living psychological document of an inner life of a composer. There's very few examples of other composers like that. Maybe Shostakovich, a little bit Bartok, but I'd say that Beethoven. Okay, you look at Haydn did write 80 quartets, and in a certain sense he was the model for Beethoven, I'd say. Mozart also, but Mozart's work was less even in terms of the quality. The late quartets, wonderful examples of experimentation and sound. But in terms of a document, like a document of a creative individual's internal life, there's nothing. I mean, Beethoven is an A plus ultra. So you have to look at an analog like in literature, the works of Shakespeare, for an example, and even then, it's not really the same, because Beethoven wrote these quartets over a nearly 30-year period. So.
I'd love for you to talk about what it is about Beethoven and his music that speaks to us. I mean, it's a huge subject again, but the humanity of this music and why it still is so profoundly impactful to us even today.
I think it comes from the fact that Beethoven's music has this extraordinary power that touches those who open themselves up to it, from the simple fact that his whole search as a mature composer, from really the time that he wrote the Opus 18, even there you see the genesis of the late quartets, or the late style, was a search for meaning. Like, he wasn't just writing music that was satisfying our need for delightful sounds, our need for exotica of music that stimulates us. It was actually tied entirely with Beethoven's experience as a human being, and that's what he found in his music, these channels for that form of expression that expresses the unexpressible, in a way that the meaning within the music, you'd have to write an analogous novel or a philosophical tract to explain what we hear in that music, because it is a direct translation through his utter experimentation, his desire to be truthful and honest, that his music actually did exactly what he's looking for. It was such a struggle for him. Every single quartet, even from the Opus 18 through the middle period, 59, 95, 74, and all the wonderful late works, was an experiment, was entirely unique as a unique individual. There was no retreading of ground or retreading water. There was nothing that he was doing over again. Yes, it was the same language in a way, the late classical, and he didn't know it was a romantic period beginning then. That wasn't what he was looking for. He was looking pure and simple for meaning. And it's almost as though his deafness contributed to that, because he created these oral documents that only could exist, in fact, in his mind for himself. And that's what makes them all the more extraordinary. That's what makes them so extraordinary. So it's really pretty simple that they are so powerful and so direct and meaningful because of what they meant for him, the reason that he wrote these works. And I know that this is true of other works he wrote, the symphonic works, the piano sonatas, notably. But in the quartets, you find almost a perfect distillation of that process as a creative composer. And I think it cost him dearly in terms of the psychic energy to do that. And when we listen to a Beethoven quartet, it's not background music. It can never be. It's just it's something that that is a two-way street when you listen to a work like that, and when you play a work like that, it's as though you're in another universe, and and you're standing next to Beethoven himself, and I don't know if that starts to get somewhere, but it's the power of that expression of what it means to be a human being, and in very many ways.
Absolutely. Well put, every word of that. So now we're going to listen to this video. Wonderful music. This is from Beethoven Opus 59. I know everyone will enjoy this. Doug, thank you so much. That
Okay,
was a beautiful, beautiful performance of the Opus 59 number 2. And I know the students are really inspired to have seen and heard that. And so we're going to wrap up this video portion of it and go to our live portion now. And the students will have a chance to ask you some questions. So thank you for this, and on to the next.